I stood barefoot on the cold tile of the interrogation room, watching an officer sift through my grandfather's legal papers like they were contraband. The boarding call for the last flight to Briarage had ended 20 minutes ago. My parents had told me they wanted us to be a family again at the hearing. But as the officer asked about a specific childhood nickname that wasn't on my identification, I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was an ambush. The rain at Rainline International Airport in Seattle was not just falling, it was driving against the glass walls of the terminal with a rhythmic violence that matched the hammering of my own heart. I tightened my grip on the leather strap of my tote bag, my knuckles turning white. Inside that bag, shielded by a plastic sleeve, were the printed documents for my grandfather's inheritance hearing. They were standard forms, mostly birth certificates and identification proofs, but I held on to them as if they were the nuclear codes. I checked the departure board again. Flight 712 to Briarage, Oregon. Boarding in 40 minutes. I was 33 years old. A marketing manager for a mid-sized tech firm, and a woman who paid her taxes on time. Yet, as I power-walked toward the security checkpoint, I felt like a truant teenager. The sensation was a phantom limb, a remnant of a lifetime spent managing the emotional climate of the Henderson household. My mother's voice from last night echoed in my ears, drowning out the airport announcements. "Alice, honey, are you sure this trip is necessary?" Marilyn Henderson had asked, her tone dripping with that specific brand of concern that always felt like a leash tightening. "Your father and I can handle the legalities. You know how overwhelmed you get in high-pressure situations. We just want you to rest." I had told her I was coming. I had told her I would be there at 10 o'clock sharp. But the seed had been planted, the familiar suggestion that I was fragile, that I was incapable, that I was a liability to myself. I shook my head, physically dispelling the memory. I stepped into the security line. It was relatively short for a Tuesday morning. I placed my tote bag in the gray bin. Pushing it onto the conveyor belt, I walked through the scanner, holding my breath, waiting for the generic beep that signaled I was clear. I stepped out. The machine remained silent. I reached for my bag. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice was not the bored drone of a TSA agent. It was sharp, authoritative, and it came from a man in a dark blue uniform standing just behind the screening area. He was flanked by two others. The badge on his chest read, "Airport Operations Police Unit." "Please step this way," he said. He did not phrase it as a question. I frowned, my hand hovering inches from my bag. "Is there a problem?" "I have a flight boarding in, ma'am. Please step this way, now." The air around me seemed to vanish. Travelers behind me were staring, their eyes wide with that mix of curiosity and relief that it wasn't them. I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck. I followed the officers away from the checkpoint, down a narrow beige hallway that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. They led me into a small, windowless interview room that contained nothing but a metal table and 3 chairs. "Sit down," the lead officer said. He was older, with graying temples and eyes that looked like they had seen every variation of human deception. I sat. My hands were trembling, so I clasped them together on my lap to hide it. "What is going on?" I asked. My voice sounded thin, reedy. "I have nothing illegal in my bag. You can search it." "We intend to," the officer said. He placed a folder on the table. "Ms. Henderson, we received a credible tip regarding a behavioral concern. Specifically, that a passenger matching your description, traveling on Flight 712 to Briarage, was exhibiting erratic signs of agitation and might be transporting sensitive materials intended to disrupt a legal proceeding." I stared at him. The words made no sense. "Disrupt a legal proceeding?" "I am going to a hearing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "For my grandfather's estate. I have my birth certificate and my ID. That is it. Who told you I was agitated?" The officer ignored the question. He opened the folder. He didn't look at me. He looked at a printed memo. "Ms. Henderson, are you currently under the care of a mental health professional?" "Excuse me? Have you been off any prescribed medication in the last 48 hours?" I stood up. This is ridiculous. I am not on medication. I am not agitated. I am a business professional trying to catch a flight. I want to know who called you. Sit down. Ms. Henderson, he said. His voice dropped an octave. If you continue to raise your voice, we will have to restrain you. I sat. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. They began to empty my bag. They pulled out my laptop, my toiletry kit, the paperback novel I had packed. Then, the officer reached for the plastic sleeve containing the legal documents. He flipped through them slowly. The silence in the room was suffocating. Documents for a legal proceeding, he muttered, as if confirming a hypothesis. He looked up at me. His eyes narrowed. We need to verify your identity. Ms. Henderson, your ID says Alice Marie Henderson. Is that correct? Yes. Do you go by any other names? No. He looked back down at the memo. That is strange. The tipster was very specific. They mentioned that we should look out for a woman named Alice, but they used a specific identifier to ensure we had the right person. They said to check if she responds to the name Little Bird. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table. The metal was cold against my palms. What did you say? I whispered. Little Bird, the officer repeated, watching my reaction closely. Does that mean something to you? My breath hitched. Little Bird was not a nickname my friends used. It was not a name my colleagues used. It was not even a name my grandfather used. It was exclusively, entirely, the name my father used for me when I was a child, usually right before he told me I wasn't allowed to do something for my own good. Little Bird, you are too small to climb that tree. Little Bird, let Daddy handle the scary man. It was a name that had not been spoken aloud in 20 years, not since I left for college. It certainly wasn't on any government database. Yes, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. That is my childhood nickname. The officer exchanged a look with his partner. The tension in the room shifted. It didn't disappear, but the aggressive edge blunted slightly. They realized the tip was personal. They kept me there for another 45 minutes. They ran my license. They checked my background. They went through every pocket of my jeans. They asked me 3 times if I intended to cause a scene at the Briarage Municipal Hall. By the time they released me, muttering a curt apology about an abundance of caution in the current security climate. The clock on the wall read 8 o'clock. I walked back out to the terminal, my clothes disheveled, my bag a chaotic mess. I looked at the departure screens. Flight 712 had departed. The next flight to Briarage or any nearby airport didn't land until 2 in the afternoon. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I stood in the middle of the concourse, people flowing around me like water around a stone. The panic that had been consuming me moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. This was not a random security check. This was not a mistake. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers were steady now. I dialed my father. Gordon Henderson answered on the first ring. Alice? Oh, thank goodness. We were getting worried when we didn't see your flight status update. His voice was sugary, thick with that performative warmth he used when he was playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. It was the voice he used when he lied. I missed the flight. Dad, I said. Oh, no. He said. The surprise sounded rehearsed. What happened? Traffic? You know, your mother said you sounded a bit scattered yesterday. Maybe it is for the best. You can take a day to reset, and we can fill you in on... Airport security stopped me. I cut in. There was a pause on the other end. It lasted exactly 1 second too long. Security? Gordon asked. Why? They got a tip. I said, someone told them I was a behavioral risk. They told the police to look for a woman called Little Bird. Another pause. This one was heavier. Well, Gordon said, his tone shifting smoothly from surprise to a soothing, condescending purr. Alice, sweetheart, you have to understand. We got a call from someone who was worried about your state of mind. We were just concerned. We did what any parents would do to ensure their daughter didn't do something she would regret. Safety first, Little Bird. He didn't even deny it. He didn't even try to hide it. He just reframed it. It wasn't sabotage. It was protection. It wasn't a trap. It was love. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't scream. I just pressed the red button. I immediately dialed Nora Klein. Nora picked up on the second ring. She was in the middle of a meeting. I could hear the murmur of voices in the background, but she hushed them instantly. "Alice, you should be in the air." They stopped me. I said, "My parents called the cops on me at the airport." "Nora, they used a fake tip to make me miss the flight." Nora didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't ask for details. She had known my parents for 15 years. She simply said, "Okay, where are you?" "Terminal B. Give me 2 minutes. Do not move." Nora worked in logistics for a massive shipping conglomerate. She knew how to move things, and people, around the world when the normal routes failed. I stood by a Hudson newsstand, staring at a magazine cover without seeing it, until my phone buzzed. "Go to gate A9, Nora said, her voice clipped and professional. "There is a cargo commuter flight headed to Crestview. It is a terrifyingly small plane and you will be sitting next to crate of engine parts. But it leaves in 20 minutes. Crestview is an hour drive from Briarage. If you rent a car and drive like a maniac, you will be late. But you will get there. I love you." I said, "Go." I ran. I didn't race this time. I sprinted. I got the last seat on the turboprop, squeezing in next to a man in a jumpsuit who smelled of hydraulic fluid. As we sat on the tarmac, waiting for clearance, I pulled out my phone again. I needed to understand the mechanics of what had happened. My father said they got a call from someone worried, but the police said the tip came from a credible source. I opened my email app. I scrolled back to the itinerary my mother had forwarded me 3 days ago. The subject line was "Flight details. Please be careful." I tapped on the message details, expanding the header information. Usually, this was gibberish to me, but Nora had taught me once how to look for the originating server. From Marilyn, Henderson Mail, com, to Alice, Henderson Workmail, com FW Do, from V Cross Briarage, Civic, org. I froze. The email hadn't originated with my mother. She had forwarded a flight option that had been sent to her. By V Cross. I didn't know of V Cross, but I knew the domain, Briarage Civic. My parents were retired. They didn't work for the Briarage Civic Center. They were supposedly just quiet retirees living in a rental house while the estate was settled. Why was someone from a local organization helping my mother coordinate my travel? And specifically, the travel I had just been sabotaged from completing? The plane lurched forward, the propellers roaring to life. I stared at the screen until the signal cut out. The drive from Crestview to Briarage was a blur of gray highway and adrenaline. I rented a sedan that smelled of stale cigarettes and pushed it to 80 miles an hour. The landscape shifted from the industrial sprawl of the airport to the rugged, misty coastline of Oregon. Briarage was a town carved out of the forest, perched on the edge of cliffs that dropped violently into the Pacific. It was 1 o'clock when I pulled up to the brick building housing Morrow Sable Legal Group. I was 3 hours late. I smoothed my rumpled shirt, ran a hand through my hair, and walked inside. The receptionist looked up. She was young, and her expression shifted from professional greeting to awkward recognition. "Ms. Henderson?" she asked. "Yes," I said, breathless. "I am so sorry. I had travel difficulties. Is the hearing still in session?" She bit her lip. "Oh, Ms. Henderson, the hearing was postponed." "Postponed?" I leaned against the heavy oak desk. "Why?" "Because you were not here," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "and because, well, you should speak to Ms. Vaughn." She pointed toward a frosted glass door. Celeste Vaughn was the court-appointed neutral administrator for my grandfather's estate. I had only spoken to her once on the phone, but I had liked her. She was a woman who spoke in complete paragraphs. I knocked and entered. Celeste was standing by the window, looking out at the rain. She turned as I entered. She was a striking woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and a suit that cost more than my car. Alice, she said. She didn't smile. I am glad you made it. We were told you had been detained. I said, by my parents, or by the police, at their direction. Celeste nodded slowly. She didn't look surprised. That fits the narrative of the motion. What motion? I asked. Celeste walked to her desk and picked up a thick document. At 10:15 this morning, when you failed to appear, an emergency motion was filed by your parents' legal representation. It is a motion for capacity concern. I sank into one of the guest chairs. Explain it to me like I am 5. They are claiming that you are mentally unstable, Celeste said, her voice gentle but clinically precise. They claim your behavior has been erratic, that you have been unreachable, and that you are currently unfit to participate in the financial decisions regarding the Henderson estate. The incident at the airport, which they characterized as a mental health episode involving law enforcement, is the primary exhibit. I felt the blood drain from my face. They created the incident so they could use it as evidence. It is a common tactic in high-conflict probate cases, Celeste said, though rarely executed with such timing. Because of the motion, the judge has paused the proceedings. You are temporarily barred from accessing the primary accounts until a determination is made. I closed my eyes. They won. I missed the hearing. And now I am locked out. Not entirely, Celeste said. I opened my eyes. Celeste walked to the far wall, where a large iron safe stood. She dialed in the combination, the tumblers clicking loudly in the quiet office. The heavy door swung open. Your grandfather, Arthur Henderson, was a very specific man. Alice, he hired me personally. He didn't use the family attorney. He used me. And when we drafted the final codicils to his will, he insisted on a conditional protocol. She reached into the safe and pulled out a thick, sealed packet. It was yellow manila, wrapped in string. On the front, in my grandfather's distinct, blocky handwriting, were the words, "For Alice. Open only if they try to stop you." Celeste placed the packet on the desk in front of me. He told me that if the hearing went smoothly, if everyone played nice, I was to burn this, she said. But if there was an interruption, a delay, or an attempt to block you from the table, I was to give you this. I reached out and touched the paper. It felt warm. Technically, Celeste continued, I am the administrator of the estate, and I must remain neutral. I cannot give you legal advice. I cannot take your side. But I can tell you that Arthur anticipated this day. I took the packet. Thank you. Celeste. She looked at me, her eyes softening. Get some sleep. Alice, the hearing is rescheduled for Friday. You have 3 days. Do not spend them trying to convince your parents you are sane. They already know you are. Spend them finding out why they need everyone else to think you are not. I checked into the Harbor Light Inn on the edge of town. It was a modest place, the kind with thin towels and a view of the gray harbor. But it was quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed, the room illuminated only by the street lamp outside. I placed the packet on the duvet. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a strange, vibrating frequency of anticipation. I untied the string. Inside were 3 smaller envelopes, numbered 1 through 3. I picked up the first one. Read this first. The front said, I tore it open. There was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery inside. My grandfather's handwriting was firm, unshakable. It smelled faintly of the tobacco he used to smoke in his pipe. My dearest Alice, if you are reading this, I am sorry. It means I was right. I have spent the last 5 years watching your parents. I love them, in the way a father must. But I see them clearly. They are people who believe that truth is something you construct, not something you tell. They have become very good at building fences around their lives to keep the reality out. You have always been the one who climbs the fences. That is why they are afraid of you. That is why they will try to keep you away from Briarage. Do not let them. The inheritance is not about the money. The money is just the bait. The real inheritance is the truth of what this family has been doing in this town for the last decade. The hearing is not the battlefield. The story they tell about you is the battlefield. Do not argue with them. Do not scream. They want you to scream so they can call you hysterical. Instead, write it down. Document every lie. Collect every piece of paper. The truth is boring. Alice, it is receipts and timestamps and logs. It is slow, but it is the only thing that breaks the spell. Open envelope 2 only after you have visited the Maritime Depository. Stay steady, little bird. You are stronger than they are, because you don't need the lie to survive. Grandpa. I lowered the letter. Stay steady, little bird. He had used the name, the real name, not the weaponized version the police had thrown at me, but the original, the one that meant I was loved. I stood up and walked to the mirror above the dresser. I looked at myself. My eyes were red-rimmed. My hair was a disaster. I looked exhausted. I looked like a woman who had been dragged through an airport interrogation room and driven halfway across the state. But I didn't look crazy. My parents had tried to erase me today. They had tried to rewrite my reality before I even stepped foot in town. They wanted a daughter who was a problem to be solved, a liability to be managed. I picked up the hotel notepad and a cheap ballpoint pen. I sat down at the small desk. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Tuesday, January 28th. Item 1. Rainline Airport Security Stop. Reason: false report filed by parents. Item 2. Flight 712. Missed. Item 3. Email forward from Briarage Civic Domain. Item 4. Capacity motion filed by Gordon and Marilyn Henderson. I wasn't going to call them and beg for an explanation. I wasn't going to cry into the phone and ask why they couldn't just love me. I was going to build a case. My grandfather had left me a map. I just had to survive long enough to follow it. The morning light in Briarage was gray and diffused, filtering through the high windows of the Morrow and Sable conference room like diluted milk. I sat at a mahogany table that was large enough to land a small aircraft on, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. Opposite me sat Celeste Vaughn, looking as immaculate as she had the day before, and a young man who looked like he had been awake for 3 days straight. He was introduced as Eli Mercer, a junior attorney with the firm. He had a stack of files in front of him, and he kept adjusting his glasses, a nervous tic that made me want to reach across the table and tell him to breathe. We need to review the specific contents of the motion filed yesterday, Celeste said. Her voice was calm, the auditory equivalent of a flat lake. It is important that you understand the narrative being constructed. Eli opened the top file. He cleared his throat. Ms. Henderson, he began, his voice cracking slightly before finding its footing. The emergency motion for capacity concern relies heavily on 2 exhibits. The first is the airport incident report, which we are still trying to obtain in full. The second is a document titled Community Character Statement. He slid a sheaf of papers across the polished wood. I looked down. The letterhead was thick, cream-colored, and embossed with a gold seal I recognized immediately. A lighthouse standing on a cliff, surrounded by laurels. Briarage Heritage Trust. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. The trust was the crown jewel of Briarage's nonprofit sector. My grandfather had been one of its founding donors. He had spoken at their galas. He had called them the conscience of the coast. I read the first paragraph. It is with deep regret and concern for the preservation of the Henderson legacy that we, the undersigned leadership of the Briarage Heritage Trust, support the motion to delay proceedings. We have observed a troubling pattern of instability in the beneficiaries' interactions with family members, suggesting a susceptibility to external pressure that could endanger the philanthropic mission established by Arthur Henderson. I looked up. The room felt suddenly airless. They are using the trust? I asked. My grandfather's favorite organization is calling me unstable? It is signed by the executive director. Eli said, Vivian Cross. The name from the email header, the V. Cross, who had forwarded my travel itinerary to my mother so she could sabotage it. My stomach dropped, a physical sensation of falling. It wasn't just that my parents were lying. It was that they were weaponizing the very things my grandfather loved to destroy me. They were using his reputation to dismantle mine. I looked at the signatures. There were others. Board members I vaguely recognized from childhood parties. People who had ruffled my hair and given me lemonade were now signing a legal document declaring me unfit to manage my own inheritance. I kept my face neutral. But inside, I was 12 years old again. I was standing in the kitchen of our old house in Seattle, watching my mother sweep up a broken vase, telling me to go to my room, telling me to stop crying because I was making a scene. Don't make scenes. Alice, let your sister handle the talking. Alice, you are too intense. Alice, you wear people out. That was the script. It had been running in the background of my life for 3 decades, and now they had printed it on legal stationery and filed it with a court. I pushed the paper back toward Eli. I am not unstable, I said. My voice was quiet. I have held a management position at a tech firm for 6 years. I own my apartment. I pay my bills. We know that, Celeste said softly. But probate court is not about who you are. It is about who the judge believes you are. And right now, the most respected institution in this town is saying you are a risk. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Eli jumped. I am going to talk to them. I said, Alice, Celeste warned, if you go there and get angry, you will only prove their point. I am not going to get angry, I said, buttoning my coat. I am going to be polite. I am going to be perfect. I just want to look Vivian Cross in the eye. I walked out of the law office and into the damp morning air. The Briarage Heritage Trust was housed in a restored Victorian mansion on the edge of the historic district. It was painted a soft, non-threatening yellow, with manicured hedges and a brass plaque by the door that gleamed even in the overcast weather. I walked up the steps, my boots clicking on the slate. I forced my shoulders down. I unclenched my jaw. I put on the mask I wore for difficult client meetings, the one that projected reasonable competence and infinite patience. The reception area smelled of potpourri and old money. A young woman at the front desk looked up, smiling brightly until she realized who I was. Her smile faltered, becoming plastic. I am here to see Vivian Cross. I said, oh. The receptionist looked down at her appointment book, though I knew she wasn't reading it. Ms. Cross is very busy today. I will wait. I said. I didn't have to. A door opened behind the desk, and a woman stepped out. She was petite, with expertly dyed blonde hair and a cashmere cardigan that looked softer than a cloud. She radiated a kind of aggressive warmth, the energy of a woman who would bake you cookies while foreclosing on your house. Alice, she exclaimed. She walked around the desk, her arms open. As if we were old friends reuniting after a long summer, she stopped just short of hugging me, sensing the invisible wall I had put up. Vivian Cross, I presumed. I am so glad you came by, Vivian said. Her voice was low and soothing, a therapist's voice. We heard about the trouble at the airport. Just terrible. How are you holding up, dear? I looked at her. She was good. She didn't look like a conspirator. She looked like a concerned aunt. I am fine. Vivian, I said, I was just reading the statement you submitted to the court, the one where you claimed I am mentally unstable. Vivian sighed. She gestured to the open door of her office. Come in. Let us have some tea. Standing out here feels so formal. I followed her. I didn't want tea, but I wanted to see her workspace. Her office was beautiful. High ceilings, a view of the ocean, and walls covered in framed photographs. I scanned them as I sat down in a plush velvet chair. There was Vivian with the mayor, Vivian with a senator, and there, in the center of the arrangement, was a large photo from a black tie gala. My parents, Gordon and Marilyn, stood in the foreground, holding champagne flutes, beaming. Vivian was between them. Her arm linked through my father's. They looked like royalty. They looked like a triumvirate. Vivian poured tea from a floral china pot. Alice, she said, handing me a cup I didn't take. You have to understand. The trust has a responsibility to the community. Your grandfather left a complex legacy. When your parents came to us, distraught, explaining the challenges you have been facing well, we simply wanted to ensure that the estate is managed with a steady hand. What challenges? I asked, Specifically, Vivian smiled sadly. She took a sip of her tea. You know how families are. Perception is everything. Your mother mentioned the stress you have been under at work, the episodes. We just want you to rest. Alice, not conflict, rest. The word episodes hung in the air. It was a lie so bold it took my breath away. I have never had an episode in my life, I said, and I saw the email header. Vivian. Her teacup paused halfway to the saucer. It was a micro-movement, a fraction of a second where the mask slipped. I beg your pardon? She asked. The flight itinerary. I said, my mother forwarded it to me. It came from you. You helped organize my travel. The same travel that was flagged to the police. Vivian set the cup down. The clink of china on china was sharp. I often help the Hendersons with logistics, she said. They are our most generous patrons. If I forwarded a flight option, it was simply to be helpful. I certainly cannot control airport security protocols. She leaned forward. Her eyes were full of performative pity. Alice, look at yourself. You are trembling. You are paranoid about emails and conspiracies. Does this not suggest that perhaps your parents are right? That you need time? I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, not from instability, but from the sheer effort of not screaming. She was gaslighting me in real time. She was taking my reaction to her betrayal and using it as proof of my incapacity. I stood up. Thank you for the tea, I said. I walked to the door. Alice, Vivian called after me. Her voice hardened. Just a fraction. It lost the therapist's lilt and gained the steel of a bureaucrat. The hearing officer respects the trust implicitly. Remember that. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I marched down the street, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed air. I needed to be away from the smell of potpourri and lies. I turned a corner and nearly collided with a man sitting on a park bench. He was feeding pigeons, tossing crumbs from a paper bag with a slow, methodical rhythm. Watch it, he grunted. I stopped. I knew that voice. I looked at the man. He was wearing a faded trench coat and a flat cap. He looked like a retiree who spent his days watching the tide come in, but I recognized the sharp, intelligent eyes beneath the brim of his hat. Mr. Pike? I asked. Jonah Pike looked up. He stopped tossing crumbs. He squinted at me, then nodded once, as if confirming a calculation. Hello? Alice, he said. You look like you just went 5 rounds with Vivian Cross. Jonah Pike had been my grandfather's accountant for 40 years. He was the only man Arthur Henderson trusted to balance his books. He had retired 3 years ago, disappearing into the anonymity of small-town life. You know her? I asked. I know she's a shark in a cashmere cardigan. Jonah said, sit down. You are making the pigeons nervous. I sat on the other end of the bench. The wood was damp. I thought you moved to Arizona. I said, I did. Jonah said, I came back. Your grandfather called me about 6 months before he passed. He sounded worried. Worried about what? About the vultures. Jonah said. He tossed another handful of crumbs. The birds descended in a flurry of gray wings. Arthur was a smart man. Alice, he knew your parents were circling. He knew they wanted the foundation. He built safeguards. He put locks on the money that only an honest person could open. He looked at me. Someone has been trying to pick those locks for months, he said quietly. What do you mean? Jonah dusted the crumbs from his hands. I still have friends in the back offices of this town. He said, people who see the paperwork before it gets shredded. There are ledgers missing. Alice, the Henderson Coastal Scholarship Fund. That was your grandfather's heart. It was supposed to receive a massive endowment upon his death. $5 million to send local kids to college. He paused. But the paperwork I heard about? It doesn't send the money to the scholarship fund. It redirects it to a new entity. What entity? I asked. The Marilyn and Gordon Family Advancement Initiative. Jonah said. I stared at him. They were stealing the charity money. They were taking my grandfather's legacy and rebranding it with their own names. That is why they need me out of the way. I said, I am the only one who would notice. Jonah nodded. Exactly. If you are incapacitated, if you are removed as a trustee, they get the rubber stamp, they get the money, and they get the prestige. They want to be the kings of Briarage. Alice, And your grandfather's money is the crown. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Ask your lawyer about the transfer orders dated November 12th, he said, and ask him why the trust is listed as a consulting partner on the new initiative. He stood up, his knees cracking. Be careful. Alice, these people rely on their reputation. If you threaten that, they will not just sue you, they will try to destroy you. I watched him walk away, a gray figure disappearing into the gray mist. I went back to Morrow and Sable. I didn't wait for the receptionist. I walked straight to Eli Mercer's office. He looked up, startled. He was eating a sandwich. I need copies. I said, Copies of what? He asked, wiping mustard from his lip. The transfer orders for the Henderson Coastal Scholarship Fund dated November 12th, I said, and any correspondence between the estate and the Marilyn and Gordon Family Advancement Initiative. Eli went pale. Alice, he said, I can't just give you those. Why not? I am a beneficiary. Because of the motion, he said. He looked miserable. When the capacity motion was filed, it triggered a conflict protocol. All requests for sensitive financial documents have to be reviewed by the Oversight Committee before release. It is automatic. How long does the review take? I asked. 7 to 10 business days, Eli whispered. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Of course, I said. The hearing is on Friday. That is 3 days away. They filed the motion to trigger the protocol. They locked the library so I couldn't read the books. I am sorry. Eli said, I really am. It is not your fault. Eli, I said, you are just part of the machinery. I left the office. I felt a cold anger settling in my chest. Heavy and solid. Procedural delays. That was the new weapon. They didn't have to burn the evidence. They just had to file enough paperwork to bury it until it was too late. I got in my rental car and drove. I didn't drive to the hotel. I drove to the address listed on the court filing for my parents. They were renting a house on the cliffs, a sprawling modern thing with glass walls and a view that cost more than my annual salary. I pulled into the driveway. My father's BMW was parked out front. I walked to the door and rang the bell. My mother opened it. She was wearing a silk blouse and linen trousers. Her hair was perfectly coiffed. When she saw me, her face crumpled into a mask of tragic relief. Alice, she cried. She reached for me. I stepped back. Don't, I said. Gordon appeared behind her. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a glass of wine. He looked the picture of the concerned patriarch. Alice, he said, his voice deep and reasonable. We were so worried. Why didn't you call? I walked past them into the living room. It was white and sterile. I didn't call because I was busy getting interrogated by the police you sent. I said. Marilyn let out a sob. She pressed a hand to her chest. Alice, how can you say that? She wept. We were terrified. We got a call saying you were in distress. We just wanted you safe. We are your parents. Everything we do is to protect you. It was a performance. It was Academy Award level. She was vibrating with anxiety. But it wasn't fear for me. It was fear of me. And you? Dad? I asked, turning to Gordon. You are just protecting the family legacy? Gordon took a sip of his wine. He looked at me with eyes that were as cold as the ocean outside. Legacy is a fragile thing. Alice, he said, it requires management. Your grandfather was a brilliant man, but he was getting loose at the end. He was making promises he couldn't keep. We are just trying to steady the ship. By stealing the scholarship fund? I asked. By redirecting the endowment to your own vanity project? Gordon didn't flinch. That is a gross simplification of a complex financial restructuring. He said, we are modernizing the giving strategy, something you would understand if you weren't so emotional. There it was again. Emotional. The catch-all word for any woman who asked a difficult question. I looked at them. They stood together, united in their lie. They believed it. That was the scariest part. They had convinced themselves that their greed was actually stewardship. I have one question. I said, ask, Gordon said benevolently. Who told the airport police that I was a threat? I asked. Who gave them the name Little Bird? Gordon smiled. It was a tight, thin smile. We didn't say that. He said, it wasn't a denial. It was a deflection. We didn't say that, meaning they didn't hold the phone. They didn't speak the words. But they had someone else do it. I looked at Marilyn. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was twisting her wedding ring. Round and round. I understand, I said. I walked out. Alice, stay for dinner, Marilyn called after me, her voice pitching up into desperation. We can talk this through. I got in my car and reversed out of the driveway. I didn't look back. I drove back to the Harbor Light Inn. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted and nauseous. I ordered room service but couldn't eat it. I sat by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again. I picked it up. It was an email notification. Subject: from a friend. Sender: anonymous. I opened it. It was a screenshot, a text message thread. The timestamp was yesterday morning, 8:30, 1 hour before my flight. Sender: VC. Message: the call is made. Operations confirmed they will intercept. The delay should be sufficient to keep Alice off the record tomorrow. Make sure the motion is filed by 10. Recipient: GH. Message: understood. Just keep her away from the hearing. We cannot afford her asking questions about the archive. V.C. Vivian Cross. G.H. Gordon Henderson. The phone slipped from my hand and landed on the carpet. I rushed to the bathroom and retched into the sink. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was proof. Vivian Cross hadn't just forwarded an email. She had orchestrated the police stop. She had used her connections, her influence, her community standing to call in a favor with airport security. She had framed me, and my father had signed off on it. We cannot afford her asking questions about the archive. What archive? I washed my face with cold water. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked pale, ghostly. The betrayal felt physical, like a bruise spreading across my ribs. My parents had teamed up with a stranger to gaslight me. They had built a coordinated story designed to make me look insane before I ever opened my mouth. I walked back into the bedroom and picked up my phone. I saved the screenshot. I forwarded it to a secure cloud drive. I wasn't the daughter who made scenes anymore. I wasn't Little Bird. I was the evidence collector. And I had just found the first smoking gun. The coffee at the diner on the outskirts of Briarage tasted like burnt hazelnuts and iron. I sat in a red vinyl booth that was cracked down the middle, watching the rain slide down the window. Across from me sat a woman who looked less like a private investigator and more like a weary high school principal. Renee Harlow was recommended by Nora. She was in her late 50s, wearing a rain jacket that had seen better decades and reading glasses perched on the very tip of her nose. She didn't have a notepad. She had a tablet and a digital voice recorder that sat between us like a grenade. So, Renee said, her voice was like gravel. Nora tells me your parents called the cops on you to make you miss a flight. That is a bold move. Usually, people just slash tires. I nodded. It was more than that. I have a screenshot of a text message between my father and Vivian Cross. They coordinated it. They wanted to keep me off the record. I reached for my phone to show her, but Renee held up a hand. I don't need to see it yet, she said. I need the timeline. I felt a surge of frustration. I wanted her to be outraged. I wanted her to look at the evidence of my betrayal and gasp. They are gaslighting me, I said, my voice rising. They are stealing my grandfather's charity money and telling everyone I'm crazy. Renee took a sip of her black coffee. She didn't blink. Alice, listen to me, she said. Her tone was flat, stripped of all sympathy. If they used official channels to stall you, police, airport security, courts, then they are playing a systemic game. Systems do not care about your feelings. They care about documentation. If you want to beat them, we need timelines, not emotions. You can cry in the car, in here. We build the chronology. The words stung, slapping me across the face with their cold pragmatism. But as the sting faded, I felt something else. Relief. Renee wasn't offering me pity. Pity was what Vivian Cross offered right before she stabbed me in the back. Renee was offering me a strategy. Okay, I said. I took a breath. Where do we start? We start with the public record, Renee said. She tapped her tablet screen. I ran a background check on you this morning. Not the standard employment check. I ran a localized civil search for Briarage. I frowned. I haven't lived here in 15 years. You wouldn't find anything. Renee turned the tablet around and slid it across the sticky table. I found 6 incident reports filed in the last 12 months. She said. I looked at the screen. My eyes scanned the rows of data, and my blood ran cold. March 12th, noise complaint, 442 Elm Street. Subject, Alice Henderson. May 4th, welfare check requested by concerned neighbor. Subject, Alice Henderson. August 19th, verbal altercation reported in public square. Subject, Alice Henderson. I stared at the dates. I wasn't here. I whispered. On March 12th, I was in Seattle presenting a quarterly review. On May 4th, I was at a wedding in Portland. I haven't been to Briarage in a year. Someone was here, Renee said. Or more likely, someone called these in and gave your name. They created a paper trail. Small things, nuisance complaints, nothing big enough to get you arrested, but enough to establish a pattern. A pattern of what? Of instability, Renee said. Of a woman who is loud, argumentative, and requires welfare checks. They have been building a file on you for a year. Alice, so when they filed that motion yesterday claiming you were volatile, the judge didn't just take their word for it. He looked at the system and saw a history. I felt sick. It wasn't just a reaction to the hearing. It was a long con. My parents had been slowly painting a portrait of a crazy daughter while I was busy working and sending them birthday cards. This is identity fraud. I said, it is credibility laundering, Renee corrected. They used the police blotter to wash their lies until they looked like facts. She took the tablet back. Now, she said, tell me about the money. I told her about the scholarship fund, about Jonah Pike and the missing ledgers, about the sealed packet from my grandfather. Renee listened. Her eyes narrowed. You said there were 3 envelopes. She said, you opened the first one. What is in the second? I haven't opened it yet. I said, Grandpa said to open it only after I visited the Maritime Depository. Renee signaled the waitress for the check, then pay for the coffee. She said, we are going to the depository. The Briarage Maritime Safe Depository was a relic from the days when the town was a shipping hub. It was a squat, fortress-like building near the docks, built of granite blocks that were slick with sea spray. It smelled of old paper and salt water. I left Renee in the car. She said it was better if I went in alone, to see how the staff reacted to my face. I walked into the lobby. It was quiet. The only sound the ticking of a heavy brass clock on the wall. A clerk sat behind a high counter, wearing a green visor that seemed like a costume piece but was apparently sincere. Can I help you? He asked. He was young, nervous, with acne scars on his chin. I am Alice Henderson. I said, I am here to access the harbor box. My grandfather, Arthur Henderson, left instructions. The clerk's eyes widened slightly. He tapped on his keyboard. Henderson, he muttered. Henderson. Ah. He stopped typing. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. Ms. Henderson, he said. You were just here. I froze. Excuse me? You, the clerk said. Or, well, the authorized family representative. The box was accessed 2 months ago, November 15th. My hands clenched at my sides. I was not here on November 15th. I said clearly, I live in Seattle. Who accessed the box? The clerk turned the monitor so I could see it. There was a digital log. Access date, November 15th. Authorized. Alice M. Henderson. Status, family priority. Access. There was a signature. It was a scrawl, a jagged loop that looked vaguely like my signature. But wrong. The slant was backwards. That is not my signature. I said. The clerk swallowed hard. Look, ma'am, the authorization was notarized. We don't just let anyone in. We require a notarized affinity form for any access outside the primary owner. The form was stamped and signed. By whom? I asked. He clicked a tab. Stonewick Notary Services, he read. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the screen. The clerk made a noise of protest, but I ignored him. What was taken? I asked. I don't know. He said, we don't inventory the boxes. We just secure them. But the user log shows the box was removed to a private viewing room for 40 minutes. I walked out. The wind off the ocean hit me, cold and biting. Renee was waiting in the passenger seat of her sedan. I got in and slammed the door. They were here, I said. 2 months ago. Someone signed my name. They used a notary called Stonewick. Renee started the car. Stonewick, she said. I know that office. It is a strip mall operation near the highway. They mostly handle title transfers for used cars. Not exactly high-end estate planning. Let us go, I said. Stonewick Notary Services was exactly as Renee described. It was sandwiched between a vape shop and a dry cleaner. The windows were cluttered with neon signs. I stayed in the car this time. Renee said she could get more with a clipboard and a confident lie than I could with righteous indignation. I watched her walk in. She moved with a strange, lumbering confidence. She was in there for 20 minutes. When she came out, her face was grim. She got in the car and tossed a photocopied page onto my lap. It is a mess, she said. What is it? That is the logbook page for November 15th. She said, look at the entry for Henderson. I looked. The handwriting was cramped. Affidavit of Identity, A. Henderson. Now look at the stamp number. Renee said. I squinted. It ends in 402. I said, right, Renee said. Now look at the entry above it, and the one below it. I checked. They both ended in 409. The notary used a different stamp for your entry. Renee said, an old one, probably one that was supposed to be destroyed or expired. And look at the page edge. It is perforated. The other pages are bound. This page was inserted. Alice, they cooked the book. I stared at the photocopy. It wasn't just a forgery. It was a clumsy forgery. It was the work of people who were so used to getting their way that they didn't think anyone would ever check the details. They forged my identity. I said. My voice was quiet. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't crying. I felt a cold, hard knot tightening in the center of my chest. It was a precise anger. It was the anger of an auditor finding a discrepancy. They pretended to be me so they could touch his things. I said. They put their hands on his private letters. Renee started the engine. Now you are getting it, she said. It is not personal. It is tactical. They needed to know what was in that box before you did. Now. The question is, did they take it, or did they just read it? I looked out the window. Drive me to the trust. I said, Alice, drive me to the trust. Renee, I am not going to yell. I just want to ask Vivian Cross a question about notaries. Vivian wasn't expecting me back so soon. When I walked into her office, she was on the phone, laughing softly. When she saw me, the laughter died. She hung up without saying goodbye. Alice, she said. Her voice was tighter than before. I thought we discussed the need for rest. I didn't sit down. I didn't accept the imaginary tea. I just went to the Maritime Depository. I said. Vivian didn't flinch, but her eyes went very still. Oh? She said. Yes, I continued. It seems someone accessed my grandfather's private box 2 months ago. They signed my name. They used a notarized form from Stonewick Services. I watched her throat. She swallowed. It was a small movement, but it was there. That sounds like a misunderstanding, Vivian said. Her warmth was evaporating, replaced by a bureaucratic chill. Perhaps you forgot you gave authorization? Families often share administrative duties. I have never been to Stonewick Services, Vivian, and I have never authorized anyone to access that box. I leaned forward, placing my hands on her pristine desk. Did you know that notary fraud is a felony? I asked. So is identity theft. And if a nonprofit director were found to be involved in facilitating either. Vivian stood up. She was short, but she drew herself up to her full height. Alice, I think you should leave. You are clearly agitated. This is exactly the kind of behavior that concerns the court. You are making wild accusations based on— What? A clerical error? It is not a clerical error when pages are swapped in a logbook. I said. Vivian walked to the door and held it open. The trust provided community context to the court at the request of your parents, she said. Her voice was robotic now. We have no involvement in the specific management of the estate assets. If you have issues with the depository, take it up with them. Now, please go, or I will have to call security. I looked at her one last time. She wasn't the kindly aunt anymore. She was a gatekeeper, and she was terrified. I walked out. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt nauseated. Vivian hadn't denied it. She had just hidden behind the corporate veil. The trust provided context. She was washing her hands of the dirty work she had helped organize. I needed to go somewhere real, somewhere that didn't smell of potpourri or floor wax. I drove to the edge of town, to the small bungalow where my grandfather had lived for the last 5 years of his life. He had moved there after Grandma died, saying the big house was too full of echoes. The bungalow was modest, with peeling blue paint and a garden that had gone wild. The "For Sale" sign in the yard was crooked. I parked and walked up the path. The windows were dark. My parents hadn't even bothered to keep the lights on a timer. Ms. Alice? I turned. An elderly woman was standing on the porch next door, wiping her hands on a floral apron. It was Mrs. Loretta Gaines. She had been Grandpa's neighbor for years. She used to bring him soup when his arthritis was bad. "Hello, Mrs. Gaines," I said. She shuffled down the steps and walked over to the fence. She looked older, frailer, but her eyes were bright. "I heard you were coming," she said. "I saw the police car at the airport on the news. They said there was an incident. It was a mistake." I said. She peered at me closely. "You don't look dangerous," she said. "You look like Arthur, especially around the eyes." She looked at the dark house. "It is a shame," she whispered. "What they are doing." Who is doing?" I asked. "Your parents," she said. She leaned in, lowering her voice as if the hedges had ears. "They were here a lot in the last few weeks before he passed, always arguing, loud voices. Arthur was so tired. Alice, he just wanted peace. Did he say anything to you?" "He said he was worried about the foundation." She said, "He said sharks can smell blood in the water even when you are still swimming." She paused, twisting her apron. "I heard your mother." She said, "When?" "About a week before he died. They were on the porch. She didn't know I was in my garden. She was talking to your father. She sounded panic-stricken." "What did she say?" I asked. She said, "If she gets here in time, we lose." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "If she gets here in time, we lose." Loretta looked at me apologetically. "I thought she meant you would get here in time to say goodbye. To make peace. I thought it was just family drama. You know, old wounds." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Gaines." I walked back to my car. Loretta had assumed it was emotional. She thought lose meant losing a chance at reconciliation, losing a moment of closure. But my parents didn't speak in emotional metaphors. They spoke in transactions. If she gets here in time, we lose. They weren't talking about love. They were talking about the hearing. They were talking about the timeline. If I arrived before the legal cement dried, they would lose the money. They would lose the control. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at my hands on the wheel. For 33 years, I had been trying to figure out why I wasn't enough for them, why I was too loud, too intense, too much. I had spent my entire adult life trying to curate a version of myself that they would accept. But it wasn't about acceptance. It never had been. It was about leverage. I was an obstacle. I wasn't a daughter to be raised. I was a shareholder to be outvoted. Something inside me clicked. It was the sound of a heavy door closing, the childhood need to be believed, the desperate, whining need to have them validate my reality, evaporated. I didn't need them to love me. I didn't need them to admit they were lying. I needed to beat them. I started the car. I wasn't driving back to the hotel as a victim. I was driving back as opposing counsel. back at the Harbor Light Inn. I sat at the small desk. I had turned off the overhead light and was working by the glow of the desk lamp. My phone buzzed. It was Nora. Attachment. Receipt_FWD. PDF. Message. Alice, look at the purchase date. I opened the PDF. It was a receipt for a flight from Rainline International to Mexico City. One way. The passenger name was Alice Henderson. The purchase date was January 26th, 2 days ago. The day before the airport incident. The ticket was refundable. I stared at it. Someone had bought a ticket in my name, a one-way ticket to Mexico. The day before I was stopped. If the police had searched deeper, if they had checked the airline databases, they would have found this, a one-way ticket out of the country. It would have looked like flight risk behavior. It would have looked like I was running. It was a plant. Just like the behavioral tip. Just like the noise complaints. They had bought insurance. If the agitation story didn't stick, they had the flight risk story ready to go. I put the phone down. I opened the leather-bound notebook I had bought at the drugstore. I picked up a pen. My hand was steady. I wrote, The Henderson Timeline. January 2025. Fake incident reports begin in Briarage. November 15th, 2025. Unauthorized access to Harbor Box via forged notary log. January 26th, 2026. Purchase of fraudulent one-way ticket to Mexico in my name. January 27th, 2026. The airport stop. January 28th, 2026. The capacity motion filed. I looked at the list. It was ugly. It was criminal. But it was clear. My grandfather had known. The hearing is not the battlefield. He had written, the story they tell about you is, he had left me a method. He didn't leave me a gun or a lawyer. He left me the instructions to be a historian of my own demise. Document, verify, wait. I close the notebook. Let them think I'm crazy. Let them think I am defeated. I was just gathering the exhibits. The Briarage Municipal Hall Annex was a building designed to drain the color out of the human spirit. It was all beige linoleum, fluorescent humming, and the smell of floor wax masking the scent of stale anxiety. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on Friday. I arrived at 8:30. I was directed not to the heavy oak table in the center of the room where the attorneys sat, but to a small, metal folding table set off to the side, near the water cooler. It was the kind of table you would use for a children's lemonade stand. There was a placard on it. A. Henderson, limited participant. The term felt like a physical slap. It was a legal muzzle. Because of the emergency motion my parents had filed, the one claiming I was unstable, the one supported by the false police report, I was allowed to be present, but I was not allowed to sit at the main table. I was an observer with the right to speak only when addressed. I sat down. The metal chair was cold. I placed my notebook on the table. The Henderson timeline. I aligned my pen parallel to the edge of the paper. Eli Mercer sat at the main table, looking like a teenager who had accidentally wandered into a wolf den. He kept glancing back at me, his eyes wide behind his glasses. Just stay calm, Alice, he had whispered to me in the hallway. If you outburst, they win. If you cry, they win. Just breathe. I wasn't going to cry. I was done crying. At 8:50, the double doors opened. My parents entered. They looked like the cover of a magazine dedicated to dignified grief. My mother, Marilyn, was wearing a charcoal suit that was modest but clearly expensive. She wore no jewelry except her wedding band. Her face was pale, her makeup done to accentuate the shadows under her eyes. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept in weeks because she was so worried about her wayward daughter. My father, Gordon, was the pillar of strength beside her. He held her elbow, guiding her as if she were made of glass. They were flanked by a man I didn't know. He was tall, with silver hair swept back from a tanned forehead and a suit that cost more than my car. He carried a leather briefcase that looked soft enough to sleep on. This was Calder Wynn. Eli had briefed me. Calder Wynn wasn't a local lawyer. He was a specialist from Portland who handled high-stakes reputation management. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to bury a scandal so deep it hit magma. They sat at the main table opposite Eli. They didn't look at me, not once. It was a deliberate shunning, a performance of pained distance. The hearing officer entered. He was a balding man named Mr. Abernathy, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "We are here to address the emergency motion regarding the estate of Arthur Henderson," Abernathy mumbled, shuffling papers, "and the request to suspend the beneficiary rights of Alice Henderson pending a capacity evaluation." Calder Wynne stood up. He didn't project his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke in a rich, soothing baritone that filled the room with the texture of warm honey. "Mr. Hearing Officer," Wynne began, "my clients, Gordon and Marilyn Henderson, approach this day with heavy hearts. This is not a legal maneuver to them. It is a protective measure. They are terrified for their daughter." He gestured vaguely in my direction without making eye contact, as if I were a volatile chemical that might explode if looked at too directly. "We have submitted documentation regarding Ms. Henderson's recent behavioral escalation." Wynne continued, "The airport incident involving law enforcement, the community concerns raised by the Briarage Heritage Trust, the pattern of instability. We are simply asking for a pause, a cooling-off period. We want to ensure that the estate is not damaged by impulsive decisions made during a mental health crisis. It was masterfully done. He didn't call me crazy. He called me fragile. He didn't say I was dangerous. He said I was impulsive. He stripped me of my agency and disguised it as love. I watched Eli. He was scribbling furiously, but he didn't object. He was following the protocol of polite legal discourse. Institutions prefer calm. They prefer the man in the expensive suit using soothing words over the woman at the folding table, with the truth burning in her throat. If I stood up and screamed that they were liars, I would only prove Wynne's point. So I sat. I kept my spine straight. I kept my face blank. I decided then that calm would not be their shield. It would be my weapon. I would be so calm I was terrifying. Celeste Vaughn stood up next. She was the only person in the room who looked entirely comfortable. As the neutral administrator, she answered to no one but the dead man. "Mr. Hearing Officer," Celeste said, her voice crisp, "while the motion for capacity is under review, my duty is to execute the specific instructions of the decedent's estate plan. Arthur Henderson was quite particular about the order of operations." She opened a file. "Before any distribution of assets can occur, and specifically before the major endowment is transferred to the Henderson Coastal Scholarship Fund, a condition must be met." The room went quiet. Gordon shifted in his chair. Celeste continued, "Mr. Henderson created a conditional bequest. The $5 million endowment is contingent upon the preservation and review of a specific archive. He called it the Truth Repository." I saw Marilyn's hand tighten on Gordon's sleeve. Her knuckles were white. "This repository," Celeste read, "consists of personal journals, audio recordings, and correspondence from the last 10 years of Arthur Henderson's life. It is currently stored at a third-party facility, Seaglass Archive Services. The will states that if this archive is tampered with, destroyed, or if access is denied to any beneficiary, the endowment is automatically voided and the funds are redirected." "Redirected to where?" Wynne asked smoothly, though his eyes had lost their warmth. "To an external audit firm for a forensic accounting of all family assets," Celeste said. The silence that followed was absolute. My grandfather had rigged the game. He knew they wanted the money for the foundation to boost their social standing, but to get the money, they had to let the truth survive. If they tried to bury the truth, they triggered an audit that would expose everything. Calder Wynne recovered instantly. "An archive," he said, chuckling softly. "How dramatic. Of course, we want to honor Arthur's wishes, but given the current concerns about stability and the potential for fabrication, we would request a delay to verify the authenticity of this facility. We need to ensure these materials are actually relevant and not just the ramblings of a man in cognitive decline. He was pivoting. He wanted to stall. He wanted to keep the archive locked up while they figured out how to neutralize it. I looked at Renee Harlow. She was sitting in the back row, looking like a bored member of the public. I tore a corner off my notebook page. I wrote 3 words. Find sea glass. Today. I folded it small. I raised my hand. Mr. Abernathy looked at me, surprised. Mrs. Henderson? May I pass a note to my counsel? I asked. My voice was low, steady, and devoid of any of the hysteria Wynne had described. Abernathy blinked. Yes. I stood up and walked to the main table. I handed the note to Eli, but as I did, I let my hand brush against the edge of the table, dropping the folded paper onto the floor near the aisle. I sat back down. Eli didn't see it, but Renee did. 5 minutes later, Renee stood up, coughed into her hand, and walked out of the room. The hearing dragged on. Wynne spent an hour arguing about the definition of capacity. He brought up the airport incident again. He produced the email from the Briarage Heritage Trust. I listened to them dismantle my life. I listened to them turn my career success into obsessive work habits and my independence into isolation. I wrote it all down. Item 5. Calder Wynne claims Arthur was in cognitive decline. Item 6. Vivian Cross's email used as character evidence. At 11 o'clock, the doors opened. Renee slipped back in. She looked wet. It had started raining hard outside. She walked up the aisle and sat behind me. She leaned forward, pretending to retrieve a dropped pen. Sea Glass Archive Services doesn't exist, she whispered. I froze. It is a shell, she hissed. I pulled the business registration. It is a single filing cabinet in a rented office park in Crestview. The manager is listed as Northline Stewardship, LLC. And? I whispered back. Northline's registered agent address is 42 Ocean View Drive. Renee said, I knew that address. That is the Briarage Heritage Trust. I whispered. Renee sat back. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a deafening click. Sea Glass Archive Services wasn't a neutral third party. It was a dummy corporation owned by the very nonprofit my parents were using to destroy me. My grandfather had stored his secrets with a company he thought was safe, or perhaps he had been tricked into using it. But my parents and Vivian Cross controlled it. That meant they had the archive. And if Wynne got his delay, if he got his verification period, they would have time to sanitize it. They would burn the journals. They would erase the tapes. They would leave nothing but a hollow shell, and then claim there was nothing there to begin with. The nonprofit wasn't just a bystander providing character references. It was the infrastructure of the fraud. My parents hadn't just lied. They had bought an institution to launder their legitimacy. My vision narrowed. The beige walls seemed to recede. All I could see was the back of Vivian Cross's head. She was sitting 2 rows behind my parents, watching the proceedings with the stillness of a predator. I looked at Eli. He was losing the argument about the delay. Wynne was bulldozing him with procedural jargon. I couldn't stay quiet anymore, but I couldn't scream. I stood up. Mr. Abernathy. I said. Wynne stopped talking. He turned to look at me with a condescending smile. Ms. Henderson. Wynne said, We are in the middle of a motion. I ignored him. I looked directly at the hearing officer. Sir, I am requesting an immediate preservation order for the contents of the Sea Glass archive. Wynne sighed. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of interruption. I am not interrupting. I said. My voice cut through the room. It was cold, precise. I am stating a fact. The opposing counsel is requesting a delay to verify the archive. I am stating that the archive is currently in the custody of an entity with a conflict of interest. Wynne's smile faltered. What are you implying? I am not implying anything. I said, I am reading from the public record. I held up my notebook, though there was nothing on it but my timeline. Sea Glass Archive Services is managed by Northline Stewardship, LLC. Northline Stewardship, LLC shares a registered legal address with the Briarage Heritage Trust. I pointed to the gallery. The executive director of the trust, Ms. Cross, is sitting in this room. She is a signatory on the motion to declare me incompetent. Therefore, the entity holding the evidence of my grandfather's true intentions is controlled by the same people who are trying to silence me. The room went deadly silent. I saw Vivian Cross stiffen. Her perfect posture collapsed for a fraction of a second. Marilyn turned around and shot a look at Vivian, a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Wynne stepped forward. "This is preposterous. These are conspiracy theories from a woman who—" "The estate plan is explicit," Celeste Vaughn interrupted. We all turned to Celeste. She was standing now, too. She looked at me, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "Ms. Henderson is correct," Celeste said. "The codicil states that the archive must be independent. If there is a link between the storage facility and a party to this dispute, the integrity of the estate is compromised." She looked at Abernathy. "I support the beneficiary's request. We need a preservation order. Immediately. And we need a neutral court-martial to secure the facility." Wynne opened his mouth. But Abernathy held up a hand. The hearing officer looked at the papers in front of him. He looked at Vivian Cross, who was now staring straight ahead, her face a mask of stone. "Motion granted." Abernathy said, "I am issuing a temporary restraining order on the Seaglass facility. No materials are to be moved, accessed, or destroyed until a court-appointed master can inventory them." He banged his gavel. "We are in recess until 2 o'clock. I sat down. My legs were shaking, but not from fear, from the adrenaline of the kill. My parents stood up. They didn't look at me. They rushed out of the room, Wynne trailing behind them, whispering furiously into his phone. Vivian Cross stood up slowly. She turned and looked at me. It wasn't a look of anger. It was a look of assessment. She was realizing, for the first time, that I wasn't just Gordon and Marilyn's daughter. I was Arthur's granddaughter. I walked out of the annex into the rain. The air was cold and wet, soaking into my blouse. But I didn't feel it. I stood under the overhang, watching the water drip from the gutters. "Alice," I turned. Jonah Pike was standing there, holding a black umbrella. He looked like a grim reaper in a raincoat. "You did good in there," he said. "You were inside?" I asked. "I was in the back," Jonah said. I saw Vivian's face. She looked like she had swallowed a lemon. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I need to tell you something. Alice. Something Arthur told me a month before he died." I listened. The rain drummed against the pavement. "He knew." Jonah said. "He knew about the trust. He warned me about Marilyn's fundraising friends. He said they were getting greedy. He said they were treating the foundation like a personal piggy bank. Why didn't he change the will?" I asked. "Why didn't he just cut them out?" "Because he wanted you to know," Jonah said. "He said if he just cut them out, they would fight it. They would drag his name through the mud. They would say he was senile. He needed them to expose themselves." Jonah looked at me, his eyes sharp. He told me, "If they pull the same tricks on Alice, she will need a door that opens only when they shove." I stared at him. The integrity clause, the truth repository. He built a trap. I whispered. "He built a mirror," Jonah corrected. He knew that the harder they fought to hide the truth, the more they would prove that they were hiding something. Today, when Wynne asked for that delay, he shoved, and you opened the door. He handed me the umbrella. "Keep this," he said. "It is going to get stormier." He walked away into the rain, unbothered by the wet. I went back to the hotel. I needed to regroup. I needed to talk to Renee about how to secure the archive before Northline could shred everything. I walked down the hallway to room 204. I stopped. There was a white envelope sliding out from under my door. I stared at it. It looked innocent, just a piece of paper on the carpet. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, picking up the envelope as I entered. I locked the deadbolt behind me. I sat on the bed and opened it. There was no letter, no greeting, just a single page of heavy bonded paper. It was a draft agreement. Settlement and non-disclosure agreement. Party A, the estate of Arthur Henderson. Party B, Alice Henderson. I scanned the terms. It offered me a payout, a lump sum, $3 million. Tax-free, immediate transfer. In exchange, I would agree to withdraw my objection to the capacity motion. I would resign my position as a potential trustee of the foundation. I would sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding all estate matters, and I would waive my right to access the Seaglass archive. There was no signature at the bottom. It was blank, but I held the paper up to the light. There, in the fabric of the paper itself, was a watermark, a stylized scale of justice. Calder Wynn Associates. My parents hadn't sent this. Their lawyer had. I dropped the paper onto the bed. $3 million. That was the price of the truth. That was how much they were willing to pay to keep that archive closed. I felt a smile touch my lips. It was a cold, sharp smile. They weren't offering me money because they wanted to be generous. They were offering me money because they were terrified. They knew what was in those boxes at Seaglass. They knew what my grandfather had recorded. And they knew that if I heard it, their entire world, the galas, the reputation, the legacy, would burn to the ground. I picked up my phone and dialed Renee. "Renee," I said. "Yeah?" "I just got a settlement offer." I said, $3 million to walk away. There was a silence on the line. Then Renee let out a low whistle. "That is a lot of hush money," she said. "It is," I agreed. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the agreement. I looked at the timeline in my notebook. "I'm going to frame it," I said, "and then I am going to burn them down." The settlement agreement sat on the hotel bedspread like a dead thing. $3 million. It was a number that could buy a house in Seattle, a decade of travel, or a lifetime of silence. It was a clean, round number designed to make a problem disappear. I looked at Renee Harlow. She was leaning against the radiator, arms crossed, waiting for me to speak. "They are afraid," I said. My voice was steady. "They are terrified," Renee agreed. "You don't offer 7 figures to a relative you think is crazy unless you know they are actually dangerous." I picked up the document and tore it in half. Then I tore the halves into quarters. The sound of the thick, bonded paper ripping was the most satisfying thing I had heard in days. "I am not signing," I said. Renee nodded, a grim smile touching her lips. "Good. Because if you had, I would have had to bill you for wasting my time. We have work to do." I said, "I want you to go back to the airport, not physically, but administratively. Use the Public Records Request Act. I want the specific log of the incident report, not the summary they gave me, but the metadata. I want to know exactly how that tip came in. Was it a phone call? An email? An automated system?" Renee pulled out her tablet. "I will have to go through the Rainline Airport Oversight Office," she said. "It is a bureaucracy, which means they are slow, but they are also obsessive about liability. If someone used their system to harass a passenger, they will want to cover their own backs. Do it," I said. "Find the channel." The next morning, I walked into the offices of Morrow and Sable to fire my lawyer. Eli Mercer looked relieved when I told him I was rejecting the settlement, which surprised me, but then he started talking, and the relief curdled into anxiety. "Alice," he said, pacing his small office, "I have to advise you. This offer, it is generous. If we push for the archive and find nothing, or if the court rules against us on the capacity motion, you could end up with nothing, my firm. The partners feel that de-escalation is the prudent strategy." I looked at him. He was a good man. He was honest. But he was playing a game of chess while my parents were playing a game of knife fighting. "Eli," I said gently, "you are a peacetime lawyer." He stopped pacing. He looked at me, adjusting his glasses. "I am," he admitted. "I don't like blood." I stood up and extended my hand. "Thank you for everything you have done." I said, "But I'm going to war, and I need a different kind of general." I left his office and drove 20 minutes south to a coffee shop in a strip mall where I met Dahlia Reese. Dahlia had been recommended by a colleague in Portland who described her as a chainsaw in a silk scarf. She was waiting for me in a back booth. Reviewing a stack of documents she had already pulled from the court docket, she was 40, with hair cut short and sharp, and she wore a suit that looked like armor. She didn't offer me coffee. She didn't ask how I was feeling. This motion for capacity is garbage, she said without preamble. Her voice was raspy. Deep. It is a boilerplate filing designed to freeze assets. But they made a mistake. What mistake? I asked, sliding into the booth. Dahlia tapped a page with a manicured fingernail. They cited the airport incident as the primary evidence of instability. She said, that makes the incident material to the estate case. If we prove the incident was manufactured, we don't just clear your name, we trigger the integrity clause. I frowned. I know about the integrity clause. It protects the archive. No, Dahlia said, her eyes gleaming. Not that clause. The other one. She flipped to the back of the estate plan. To a section I had glossed over in my initial reading. It was buried in the definitions of beneficiary conduct. Section 9, paragraph 4. Dahlia read, if any beneficiary is found by a court of competent jurisdiction to have knowingly filed a false statement or affidavit for the purpose of restricting the participation of another beneficiary, their portion of the discretionary distribution shall be immediately forfeited and diverted to the Cedar Bridge Accountability Fund. I stared at the page. Cedar Bridge? I asked. It is a watchdog charity, Dahlia said. They audit nonprofits for fraud. Your grandfather didn't just threaten to cut them off. He threatened to fund their worst nightmare. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest. It was a dark, jagged sound. He knew. I said, he knew they would try to lie about me. He bet on it. Dahlia said. She closed the file. I am taking the case, Alice, but we move fast. The hearing is tomorrow. We need to file an emergency counter motion by 5 o'clock today. We need to allege coordinated interference. I have evidence. I said, I have the notary log. I have the flight records. Good, Dahlia said. But we need the smoking gun. We need the link between the parents and the airport. Renee is working on it, I said. Then let us go see the administrator. Dahlia said, I want to look Celeste Vaughn in the eye and ask her what else is in that safe. We met Celeste Vaughn at a neutral location, a quiet seafood restaurant near the harbor that was empty at 2 p.m. Celeste looked tired. The composure she maintained in the courtroom was frayed at the edges. When she saw Dahlia, she stiffened slightly. Dahlia Reese, Celeste said. I should have known Alice would find you. Celeste, Dahlia said, sitting down. We are not here to fight. We are here for the third envelope. Celeste looked at me. She took a sip of water. I knew Arthur for 20 years. She said quietly, he was a brilliant man, but he was lonely. Towards the end, he started seeing things, patterns. He wasn't seeing things. I said, he was seeing the truth. Celeste nodded. I suspected as much. When your parents filed that motion when they produced that letter from the trust, it felt too orchestrated. But as the administrator, I couldn't act on suspicion. I needed proof. You have proof now, Dahlia said. You heard Alice in court. The archive is compromised. Celeste reached into her handbag. She pulled out the yellow packet I had seen in her office. The string was still tied around the final section. Envelope 3. She slid it across the table. He told me to give you this if the trust got involved, Celeste said. He was very specific. He said, if Vivian smiles at her, give her the list. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten, the ink shaky in places, as if he had written it on a bad day. The header read, People who will pretend to help you. I scanned the names, Mayor Lewis, the board of the yacht club, Pastor Evans, and there, halfway down the list, underlined twice, Vivian Cross. Next to her name, he had written a note. She smiles with her teeth. She wants the land for the expansion. Do not drink her tea. I felt a sob rise in my throat. Hot and sudden. It wasn't rage. It wasn't the cold clarity I had felt at the airport. It was grief. Pure, crushing grief. Because he knew. He had sat in his house, alone, writing this list. He had looked at the people who claimed to be his friends, who claimed to support his legacy, and he had seen the wolves beneath the skin. And he had to die, knowing that his granddaughter would have to walk into that den alone. He tried to protect me, I whispered, from the grave. He tried to warn me about the tea. I let the tears come. Just for a minute. I put my hand over my mouth and let myself cry for the lonely old man who had been surrounded by vultures and had spent his final days building a fortress of paper to keep them out. Dahlia didn't look away. She waited. When I stopped, I wiped my face with a napkin. I took a deep breath. The grief settled into a hard, dense stone in my stomach. "Thank you. Celeste," I said. Celeste looked at me with sad eyes. "He loved you. Alice, that is why he did this. He didn't want you to be a victim. He wanted you to be the executioner." I folded the list and put it in my pocket. "I am ready," I said. We went back to the hotel to set up a war room. Renee was waiting for us in the lobby. She looked electrified. "I got it," she said. She slapped a printout onto the coffee table. "The Rainline Airport Oversight Office is terrified of a lawsuit," she said. "They released the metadata for the incident report within 2 hours. Look at the origin code." She pointed to a string of alphanumeric characters at the top of the log. Source ID BHT-CL-882. "What is that?" Dahlia asked. "I ran it through the Municipal Partner Database," Renee said. "Rainline has a community liaison program. It allows trusted local organizations to flag potential security risks, usually for things like protests or VIP travel. It is a direct line to the operations desk. It bypasses the general tip line." "And who owns that ID?" I asked, though I already knew. Renee pointed to the bottom of the sheet. "Registrant, Briarage Heritage Trust. Authorized user, V. Cross." There it was. Vivian hadn't just called the cops. She had used a specialized security clearance, granted to her nonprofit, to flag me as a threat. "And look at the notes," Renee said. "Look at the text of the tip." I read the log. Subject: Alice Henderson. Description: female, 30 seconds, agitated. Note: subject is traveling with intent to disrupt a sensitive legal proceeding regarding community assets. Suggest detainment for behavioral assessment. Subject may disrupt a legal proceeding. They put the motive in the tip. They weren't worried about me blowing up a plane. They were worried about me talking to a judge. "This is it," Dahlia said. Her voice was low. "Dangerous. This is the silver bullet. They used federal security infrastructure to manipulate a civil probate hearing. That is not just interference. That is a federal crime." She looked at me. "I am filing the emergency motion now," she said. "We are asking for immediate sanctions. We are asking to strike the capacity motion. And we are introducing the notary log and this airport report as Exhibits A and B." "Do it," I said. Dahlia filed the motion at 4:15. At 5:30, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. At 5:31, an email arrived from Calder Wynn. Subject: regarding recent filing, Ms. Reese, your motion is a desperate attempt to distract from your client's mental state with conspiracy theories. The Briarage Heritage Trust acted out of genuine concern for public safety. Any attempt to frame this as malicious will be met with a defamation countersuit. He was blustering. He was loud. But 10 minutes later, Dahlia sent a reply. She attached the Stonewick notary log. She attached the affidavit from the maritime clerk stating the signature was forged. She wrote one sentence: "We look forward to discussing the definition of malice in open court tomorrow." Wynn didn't reply. The silence was deafening. I needed air. The hotel room felt like a cage. I walked out to the parking lot. The rain had stopped, leaving the asphalt slick and black. The streetlights were humming. "Alice." I turned. Marilyn was standing by her car. She wasn't wearing her hearing suit. She was wearing jeans and a heavy wool sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She looked older. The soft, tragic lighting she usually carried around her was gone, in the harsh glare of the street lamp. She looked sharp and brittle. I didn't step closer. "What do you want?" I asked. "We received the motion," she said. Her voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the weepy mother voice. It wasn't the comforting liar voice. It was cold. It was the voice of a woman negotiating a business deal gone bad. Gordon is having a panic attack. She said, he thinks he's going to jail. He might. I said, forgery is a felony. So is filing a false police report. Marilyn let out a short, sharp breath. It wasn't a laugh. You always were so dramatic. Alice, forgery. It was a family administrative matter. We needed to see the inventory. We needed to know what we were dealing with. You forged my name. I said, you lied to the police. You tried to have me committed. Marilyn took a step forward. Her eyes were hard. You don't understand, she hissed. You have never understood. You think this life, this house, the respect, the way people look at us, you think it just happens? I waited. It costs money. Alice, she said, it costs so much money to keep a family standing, to keep the cracks from showing. Your grandfather stopped helping. He cut us off 5 years ago. He said we were greedy. He didn't understand that we were building something. We were building a legacy built on theft? I asked. A legacy of influence, she snapped. The foundation, the trust that is power. Alice, that is security. And you? You were going to come here with your self-righteousness and tear it all down because you didn't get enough hugs as a child? I looked at her. I saw her clearly for the first time. She wasn't a victim of my father's ambition. She wasn't a passive participant. She was the architect. She was the one who believed that appearance was the only reality that mattered. You don't love me, I said softly. The words hung in the damp air. Marilyn's face twitched. For a second, I thought she might deny it. I thought she might try to slip the mask back on. But she didn't. She was too tired. I love the family. Alice, she said, and you are a threat to the family. She opened her car door. Take the settlement, she said. Take the $3 million. Go back to Seattle. Be the victim. It suits you. But don't come into that courtroom tomorrow and think you can destroy us without destroying yourself. She got in the car and drove away. I stood in the parking lot, watching her taillights fade. I felt a strange lightness. The final tether had snapped. The hope that there was some misunderstanding, some kernel of maternal love buried under the lies. It was gone. I turned to go back inside. Jonah Pike was sitting on the curb near the entrance. He was smoking a cigarette, shielding the flame with a cupped hand. He stood up when he saw me. Your mother? He asked. Yes, I said. Did she try to buy you off? She tried to scare me off. Jonah nodded. He took a drag of the cigarette. There is something else you should know. Alice. Something Arthur never put in writing because he was too ashamed. I stopped. What? You know how Gordon likes to tell people he built his real estate business from the ground up? How he talks about his self-made success. Yes, it is a lie, Jonah said. Gordon went bankrupt in '98, and again in 2005. I stared at him. I was in college in 2005. We went to Europe that summer. We stayed in 5-star hotels. Arthur bailed him out, Jonah said, both times. He paid off the creditors. He quietly injected capital into the company to make it look solvent. He saved Gordon's reputation. Why? I asked. Because Arthur believed that a man's failure shouldn't destroy his children. Jonah said, he did it for you, and for your sister. He didn't want you to grow up in the shadow of a bankruptcy. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it with his heel. But Gordon, he never forgave Arthur for saving him. He hated him for it. He felt owned. And when Arthur stopped writing checks, Gordon felt entitled to take what he thought he was owed. I leaned against the brick wall of the hotel. So the entitlement, the rage, it is all because they are frauds? Jonah nodded. They are hollow. Alice, they have been hollow for 20 years. Arthur was the only thing holding them up. And now they are trying to use his bones to keep the structure standing. I thought about Marilyn's words. You don't understand how expensive it is to keep a family standing. She wasn't talking about lifestyle. She was talking about the illusion of competence. They needed the foundation money not just to be rich, but to hide the fact that they were failures. I understand now. I said, I slept for 3 hours. I woke up at 4 a.m. I sat by the window, watching the sun try to break through the fog. My phone buzzed at 6. It was Dahlia. Message. Bad news. I called her immediately. What happened? The court-martial just reported in from Seaglass Archive Services. Dahlia said. Her voice was tight. Did they get in? Yes. Dahlia said. They secured the facility at midnight, but the logs show an entry at 10 p.m. last night. Who? Northline Stewardship. Did they destroy it? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. No. Dahlia said. The marshal says the boxes are there. The seals are broken. But the physical items appear to be present. But what? There is copying equipment in the room. Dahlia said. High-speed scanners, audio dubbing decks. They didn't destroy the archive. Alice. They copied it. Why? I asked. Why copy it if they want to hide it? I don't know, Dahlia said. Unless they found something in there they can use, or unless they modified it. If they had 2 hours with digital editing equipment, they could have altered the recordings. My stomach turned. If they altered the tapes. How do we prove what is real? I asked. That is the question for the hearing, Dahlia said. We have to force the unsealing. We have to play the tapes in open court, and we have to hope that Arthur Henderson left us a way to tell the difference between his voice and a forgery. We meet in the lobby in an hour. I said. I hung up. I showered and dressed. I put on my best suit. I put the timeline notebook in my bag. I put the settlement offer in my pocket. I looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't Little Bird anymore. I was the storm they had been warned about. I walked out the door. The final hearing was about to begin. The Briarage Municipal Hall Annex was no longer a quiet room of administrative boredom. It had transformed into a theater. When I arrived at 8:50, the gallery was full, the whispers about an emergency motion, sanctions, and charity misconduct had spread through the small town like a grass fire. I saw faces I recognized, members of the yacht club, donors to the Heritage Trust, and 3 people holding notepads who were unmistakably reporters from the regional papers. My parents were already seated. They sat spine-stiff, staring straight ahead. Marilyn was wearing a soft blue dress, the color of innocence. Gordon was in his Navy power suit. They looked like they were attending a funeral for their own reputation. I walked to my table. It was no longer the folding card table in the corner. Dahlia Reese had insisted on a proper position. I sat next to her at a long oak table, parallel to my parents. I placed my notebook on the wood, the Henderson timeline. I felt 1,000 eyes on the back of my neck. I felt the weight of their judgment, the whispered questions about the unstable daughter, but I didn't shrink. I anchored myself in the facts. I had the dates. I had the logs. I had the truth. Mr. Abernathy banged his gavel at 9 o'clock sharp. This hearing is reconvened. He announced, We are here to address the emergency motion for sanctions filed by Ms. Henderson and the counter-arguments regarding the capacity motion filed by Mr. and Mrs. Henderson. Calder Wynne stood up. He looked tired. The smooth, honeyed confidence was still there, but it was thinner, stretched tight over a layer of irritation. Mr. Hearing Officer, Wynne began, we are witnessing a spiral. That is the only word for it. Miss Henderson has taken a family disagreement and spun it into a grand conspiracy. She sees enemies in airport security. She sees malice in community nonprofits. She sees fraud in administrative errors. He gestured to the packed room. We urge the court to protect the estate from this drama. The capacity motion was filed to prevent exactly this kind of public spectacle. We simply want to ensure the assets are managed by steady hands, not by someone who sees shadows in every corner. He sat down. It was a good opening. It played to the crowd's desire for order. Dahlia Reese stood up. She didn't use honey. She used steel. Your Honor, she said, her voice raspy and projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. Mr. Wynne talks about shadows. We are here to talk about the objects casting them. She held up 3 fingers. We will demonstrate 3 pillars of interference. 1. The manipulation of federal airport security to prevent my client from attending this hearing. 2. The forgery of legal documents to access private estate property. And 3. The entanglement of a nonprofit entity, the Briarage Heritage Trust, in a scheme to defraud the beneficiary. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw heads turn toward Vivian Cross, who was sitting in the front row of the gallery, her face pale. Dahlia picked up a document, Exhibit A. She said, "The Rainline Airport Incident Report." She walked to the projector screen. The metadata log Renee had obtained appeared in stark black and white. This tip was not anonymous. Dahlia said, "It was filed using a specific partner code, BHT-CL-8-8-2. This code belongs to the Briarage Heritage Trust." She pointed to the text. "Subject may disrupt a legal proceeding. This was not a safety concern." Dahlia said, "This was a legal strategy. The tipster used a federal security channel to detain a beneficiary mere hours before a hearing, and the authorized user of that code?" She clicked the next slide. V, cross, the room shifted. It was a physical sensation, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. The reporters were scribbling furiously. "Mr. Abernathy looked over his glasses at the gallery. "Is Ms. Cross present?" he asked. Vivian stood up. She looked small. "Ms. Cross," Abernathy said, "did you authorize this report?" Vivian cleared her throat. "Your Honor, the Trust we assist with community safety. If we receive information that a resident is in distress, we pass it on. It is standard protocol. Did you have personal knowledge that Ms. Henderson was a threat to aviation safety?" Abernathy asked. Vivian hesitated. Her eyes darted to my parents, but they were staring fixedly at the table. I relied on information provided to me by close family members. Vivian said, "I was told she was agitated. I was just the conduit." "So you used your organization's security clearance to file a report based on hearsay from an opposing party in a lawsuit?" Dahlia asked. Vivian flushed. "I was trying to help a family in crisis. Thank you." "Ms. Cross," Abernathy said coldly, "you may sit." Dahlia moved to the next pillar. "Exhibit B," she said, "the Sea Glass Archive." She laid out the connection, the shell company, the shared address with the trust, the forged notary log from Stonewick Services. My parents claimed they wanted to verify the archive. Dahlia said, "In reality, they have controlled it for months through a shell entity. And 2 months ago, someone forged Alice Henderson's signature to access it." She held up the affidavit from the maritime clerk. "This is not a spiral." "Mr. Wynne," Dahlia said. Turning to him, "This is a pattern of manufacturing consent and fabricating instability." Calder Wynne stood up, his face red. "Your Honor, these are procedural irregularities. A notary error does not equal a conspiracy." "Mr. Wynne," Abernathy snapped, "sit down." Then, Celeste Vaughn stood up. The room went quiet. Celeste was the voice of the dead man. "Your Honor," Celeste said, "as administrator, I must bring the court's attention to the integrity clause." She opened the heavy estate binder. Arthur Henderson anticipated this. Section 9. Paragraph 4 states that if a beneficiary files a false statement to restrict another beneficiary, their portion of the discretionary estate is forfeited. She looked at my parents. Furthermore, she said, the clause triggers an automatic diversion of assets to the Cedar Bridge Accountability Fund. A gasp went through the room. Cedar Bridge was famous, or infamous, for auditing wealthy families and exposing tax fraud. If the court finds that the capacity motion was based on a false report, Celeste said, then Marilyn and Gordon Henderson do not just lose the argument, they lose the foundation, and they lose their privacy. Marilyn stood up. She couldn't help herself. "No!" she cried. She walked to the witness stand, ignoring Wynn's outstretched hand. "Your Honor, please," she said. Her voice broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. It was the performance of a lifetime. "I am a mother," she sobbed. "I love my daughter. You have to understand. Alice has always been difficult. She imagines things. She pushes people away. We didn't want to hurt her. We wanted to protect the family name." She gripped the railing, everything we did, the airport, the trust it was, to stop her from making a mistake she couldn't take back. We were trying to save her from herself. It was compelling. Half the room looked softened. Poor mother. Poor, suffering woman dealing with a crazy child. Dahlia didn't interrupt. She let Marilyn finish. She let the silence stretch. Then she walked to the stand. "Mrs. Henderson," Dahlia said softly, "you say you were trying to save her?" "Yes." Marilyn wept. Dahlia picked up a piece of paper. "Then can you explain this email?" She handed it to Marilyn. It was the forwarded flight itinerary from V. Cross to Marilyn Henderson. Subject: Flight options. Standard route. "And can you explain the email below it?" Dahlia asked. "The one you sent back to Ms. Cross?" Marilyn froze. She stared at the paper. Dahlia read it aloud from her own copy. Marilyn wrote, "Don't book the direct flight. Put her on the one with the layover. It gives us more time to trigger the alert." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of the drop. "You weren't saving her," Dahlia said. "You were trapping her." Marilyn's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tears stopped instantly. The tragic mask dissolved, leaving only the terrified face of a woman caught in the light. I sat at the table, my heart pounding against my ribs. I watched my mother crumble. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, aching hollow where my family used to be. "I have no further questions," Dahlia said. Marilyn stepped down. She walked back to her seat, but she walked like an old woman. Gordon didn't look at her. He was staring at the table. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth would crack. Renee stood up next. She didn't go to the podium. She just handed a stack of files to the clerk. "These are the incident reports filed in Briarage over the last year." Renee said, 6 reports, noise complaints, welfare checks, all filed against Alice Henderson." She pointed to the dates. On 3 of these dates, Alice Henderson was in Seattle. On 2, she was in Portland. On 1, she was out of the country. Renee looked at the hearing officer. "This is credibility laundering, Your Honor. They built a fake history so that when they finally pulled the trigger at the airport, the system would already be biased against her." Mr. Abernathy looked at the stack of files. He looked at the email. He looked at the partner code log. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This court is appalled," he said quietly. He looked at Calder Wynne. "Mr. Wynne, your motion for capacity is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office for review regarding potential fraud and misuse of public resources." He banged the gavel. "We will take a 15-minute recess before ruling on the archive." The room exploded into noise. Reporters were shouting questions. Board members were whispering furiously. Gordon stood up and walked over to our table. He didn't look at Dahlia. He looked at me. "Alice," he said. His voice was low, urgent. I looked up at him. "We can fix this," he whispered. "Fix what?" I asked. "The felony charges? Or the fact that you tried to destroy me?" Gordon leaned in. "Vivian," he hissed. "We can say it was Vivian. She went rogue. She was obsessed with the trust's reputation. We trusted the wrong person. She will take the fall. Alice, just drop the complaint. Drop the integrity clause. We can still settle this." I stared at him, even now, even with the walls falling down. He was looking for a scapegoat. He was ready to throw his partner, his friend, the woman who had lied for him, under the bus to save his own skin. They had always had a scapegoat ready. For 30 years. It had been me. Now, it was Vivian. It was never about family. Was it? I asked. It was just about who you could blame. Gordon's eyes darted around the room. "Alice, please. The scandal." I stood up. I was taller than him in my heels. "No, Dad," I said. "No more deals. No more scapegoats." I turned my back on him. When the session resumed, the energy in the room was electric. "Mr. Abernathy looked at Celeste. "Regarding the Sea Glass archive," he said. Dahlia stood up. "Your Honor, we request the archive be unsealed immediately, and we request that a forensic specialist authenticate the materials. Given the evidence of copying equipment found at the facility." "Granted," Abernathy said. "The court appoints Cedar Bridge Audit Services to take immediate custody of the physical assets. They will inventory and verify every item." He looked at my parents. "If any item is found to be altered or missing, the full sanctions of the estate will apply." The room buzzed. My parents looked sick. They knew what was in those boxes. They knew that once an independent auditor heard the tapes, read the journals, saw the real history of the Henderson money, the story they had told for 20 years would be over. But there was one more thing. Celeste Vaughn remained standing. "Your Honor," she said, "there is one final directive from Arthur Henderson's will." She opened the last section of the binder. It is titled, "The Guardian Provision." She read aloud. "In the event that the integrity clause is activated and the original trustees are found to be unfit, the power to appoint the new board of directors for the Henderson Coastal Scholarship Fund shall pass solely to my granddaughter, Alice Henderson." Celeste looked at me. However, she continued, "This power is granted with a condition. Alice must not use it for vengeance. She must use it for truth. If she uses the funds to punish her parents, she loses the appointment. She must decide what kind of authority she wants to become." The room went silent. I felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders. My grandfather hadn't just given me the win. He had given me a test. I could burn them. I could use the money to sue them into oblivion. I could use the foundation to publish their crimes. Or I could do what they never did. I could build something real. I looked at my parents. They were small, huddled together, waiting for the blow. They looked hollow. Jonah Pike was right. They were just ghosts in expensive suits. I didn't need to punish them. The truth was punishment enough. I stood up. "Your Honor," I said, "I accept the appointment." I looked at the gallery. I looked at the reporters. "The Henderson Coastal Scholarship Fund will be restructured." I said, "We will focus on transparency, and our first grant will be to the Cedar Bridge Accountability Fund, to ensure that no one in this town ever uses a nonprofit to hide a lie again." I sat down. The gavel banged. The hearing was over. I walked out of the hall. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds. Reflecting off the wet pavement, Renee was waiting by the door. She lit a cigarette and grinned. "Not bad, kid," she said. "Not bad at all." I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. It wasn't a happy ending. My family was gone. My parents were facing indictment. The town I grew up in was about to be turned upside down by scandal. But as I walked toward my car, holding the umbrella Jonah Pike had given me, I realized something. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. I was walking on solid ground. I was Alice Henderson, and for the first time in my life, the story was mine. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey through the twists and turns of the Henderson family secrets. Please leave a comment below letting us know where you are listening from. We love to hear from our global audience. If you enjoyed this drama, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more gripping tales of betrayal and justice. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. We read every single one. Until next time.